Next up, we have Matthew Butler, the defensive tackle out of Tennessee, who was an interesting evaluation for me because I knew absolutely nothing about him going in. I was just looking to add one more defensive tackle to my list, and I was perusing some sites, and I saw Matthew Butler coming up, sort of in that later round range. I'll be honest. And I said, "Hey, I'll take a stab at him," and I was actually pretty impressed with what I saw. You guys might see here 71.24. What's impressive about that? Well, there were sites where they had him in like the late 4th, 5th round, and I actually didn't hate what I saw out of Matthew Butler. I don't know if he's necessarily going to be some absolute game changer, but I certainly think he could be a good high-end rotational defensive tackle that can do a little bit of everything in that regard. So, in terms of my notes and my grade for him, in terms of his ability to anchor and strength at the point of attack, I gave him a 14 out of 20. It felt like that was one of his weaker areas right off the bat. I'll be honest, just having a ton of play strength, but I thought it was aided at times by some good leverage. So despite that 14 out of 20, I gave him a pretty solid 3.5 leverage grade out of 5, as there were times where he was able to stifle double teams, but then at the same time, there were other times where he was kind of getting balling off the ball by single teams, right? And it came down, at least from my observations, as being a factor of his leverage on some of these given plays. I thought that led to a lot of success against the run, and also the lack thereof sometimes led to getting rocked off the ball. What was interesting is actually in terms of his combine numbers, his bench press was far and away his weakest test. He only put up 17 reps at 225, which is in the bottom 10 percentile for all DTs, and I think you saw that at times. But then there were other times where you watch him and you're like, man, he could maybe even be a one technique, right? Like, it was very interesting, just the various levels of ability that he portrayed on different snaps. In terms of his pass rush ability, one thing that I'll note is that he was consistently, and when I say consistently, I mean in just about every game I watched, on seemingly every snap that I watched, especially some of the later ones against like Pitt or Kentucky, he was very consistently the first one off the ball for the Tennessee defensive line, like to the point that it was I don't know if it was a compliment to Matthew Butler or if it was an absolute indictment on the rest of his guys, because it was like that stark of a difference that it's like, oh wow, this is really impressive. And whether that was just him being keyed into the offensive snap counts, having great anticipation, having great reactionary quickness, whatever it was really impressive, and it put him in a good spot to win those reps, because maybe he wasn't the strongest or the biggest necessarily at 6'4", 297 pounds, but it felt like that initial burst that he had off the line helped put him in a better position to succeed than a lot of his peers, trust me. That is for sure. In terms of just the raw explosiveness, I did give him a 12.75 because besides that initial get off and burst, it felt like he wasn't always the best athlete, right? We'll just say that. I gave him a 3.5 out of 5 in terms of his, just raw athleticism, which is typically derived from the combine. At the combine, he had a really good 40 time, a 5 flat, and then some more questionable agility drills at, say, a 4.81 shuttle or a 7.89 3-cone. And then a 32-inch vert and a 9-foot 4-inch broad. So he kind of bounced back and forth in terms of really good speed, not great agility, really good explosion, not great strength, right? It was an interesting performance, but I think you sort of saw that in his game too, in terms of, I don't want to say inconsistency, but there was that sort of fluctuating ability that always kept me wondering, like, am I way too high on Butler? Am I way too low on Butler, right? Because there were just plays at times where it felt like, for example, last year my lowest graded defensive tackle was Tadaro Slayton in the 5th round. It's like, it kind of felt like that was the level of film I was watching. And then there were other times where it felt like I was watching, I graded Marvin Wilson last year in the 3rd round. I know he went significantly later, but it felt like I was watching maybe a guy like that's film, right? Or, somebody that wasn't too far removed from, say, a Liam McNeil or somebody like that, right? Osa Odigizua, guys last year that I graded just a tad higher than him. And in that regard, wasn't, was a fun and interesting player. I thought that just going through some of these other grades very quick, I gave him a 4.25 on block shedding. I thought that was one of his bigger concerns from my perspective, just being able to get off the stalemates, right? And that was the second negative that I wrote down. Not the most expansive tool belt in terms of hand usage as a pass rusher, or getting stuck as a run defender as well. It just felt like sometimes he'd be in decent positioning, but maybe couldn't quite get enough separation to detach, which again comes back potentially to that bench press number. Or even if he was able to create that separation, he wasn't able to actually take advantage of it and get off the blockers. It felt like more often he was getting off blocks with his motor, which was generally high. I gave him a 7.75 out of 10. It felt like just sort of squirming off of blocks with his high motor was more effective and more useful for him than actually shedding blocks and deconstructing blocks. And I don't want to say that's a bad thing, because having a good motor is obviously good, but you got to have a little bit more nuance than that, especially considering the uptick in competition that you're about to see at the next level. Some of these other grades, very quickly, I gave him a 3.75 out of 5 on finishing and tackling, because, frankly, once he was able to squirm away from some of those blocks, I thought he did a pretty good job making plays. I thought he had, again, I just kind of wrote that down as coming back to the high motor. It just felt like there were plays that he shouldn't have been involved on that he was. And then you could go the other way with it, where it felt like there were plays that maybe if he did better at deconstructing those blocks, there were plays that he should have been involved in that he wasn't. So it kind of went both ways, but I thought all in all he was a generally solid player in both phases of the game, as a run defender and a pass block, or as a pass rusher, I should say. Excuse me. Some of the other grades, just very quickly. Block recognition, I didn't think was necessarily the best. I thought at times he would get caught looking in the backfield rather than reading his keys, so I gave him a 2.25 there. Certainly not his most impressive area. And then, a 3 on size, a 3.5 on leverage. All of that came out to a 68.5 raw grade. Multiply that by the position premium for defensive tackles, which for me is 4% of his grade multiplied and reimbursed back into itself. Came out to a 71.24, which is for me a lower fourth round grade. I just thought that he was solid enough in a lot of areas, not overwhelmingly good. I mean, you didn't hear a ton of positives necessarily, but if he's just at average, or maybe even slightly below or above average in varying areas, I think that like I said earlier, you get a potentially high end rotational D tackle. And I'd rather take that on day 3 than I would day 2, but when it came down to just the traits and whatnot, particularly like that get off score was one of the highest grades I've given any defensive tackle in that regard. It was the fourth best that I've given, over the 20 or so that I've scouted. So that was really impressive. The first step was very impressive. It's just, what is he able to do with it from there? And the high motor helped him certainly, but if we could just add a little bit of refinement, maybe put on some strength, that would be great, right? Do some stuff in that nature, and I think that we really could be looking at a very decently solid rotational guy, and maybe could become a starter, I would say. One of the notes I did write in terms of one thing that I thought was valuable that didn't really fit into a grade is I wrote 1 tech ? 3 tech ? I'm not saying that he doesn't possess the ability to play one or the other. I actually think he could on occasion play both. If you wanted to, while say you're behind and you want to put somebody that maybe has a quick first step but isn't some 340-pound nose tackle in as, a 1 technique, I thought he could be an interior guy lined up on the center or guard, perhaps late in games or while ahead, and the opposing team is passing, right? I wouldn't necessarily want him anchoring as a run defender when teams are trying to ram the ball down your throat, but I thought that as sort of a pass rushing 1 technique, he could be fine. And then I thought as a run defending 3 technique, he could be fine as well. So it was pretty interesting in that regard. Just the different uses that I thought a team could get out of him. And will he go in the 3rd round? I I don't necessarily think so, because some of those combine numbers, like I said, were a little questionable. The tape wasn't always, the best, but I did think he was the best player on his Tennessee D line, front seven, even from what I saw. Just watching these games and studying Butler, it felt like he was the one that was attracting the most attention. So, part of me wants to say that, hey, maybe at the next level, when he's not getting much of any attention, maybe his productivity will only continue to rise. And like I said, he was already pretty productive in both facets of the game in college. So with that being said, if you thought this was a productive video, if you enjoyed hearing about a guy that I can't imagine there's a lot of content on Matthew Butler on YouTube, maybe there is, and this will get 7 views, but I have a strange feeling that this will be one of my better videos in terms of viewership. So if you guys are watching, you made it this far, thank you first and foremost. But secondly, obviously, if you did enjoy, leave a like, thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more, so that way you're always in the loop with my future content and maybe some of the other guys that your team drafted, right? So with that being said, that's all I have for you guys in this one. I'm mic'd up now. I'm mic'ing out. Peace, guys. I will see you next video.